Well, let me continue. So let's start this presentation, or let's enjoy the presentation by which was written by 3 people actually, although only 2 of them are present. And the first of them, and I apologize to him in advance, I'm probably not going to be able to pronounce the name correctly, but I'll do my best. It's Takayuki Nakanishi in Japan, and he's probably following us via some virtual means. Here in the classroom we have with us Mr. Martin Mikulas and Mrs. Sajgalikova. And let me tell you something about them very, very briefly, because I don't want to steal away their precious time. So Nakayuki is a professor at Tokyo University in Japan. His current research interests include willingness to communicate, sort of sounds very similar to the title of this presentation, language testing and extensive reading. Mr. Martin Mikulas works as a senior lecturer at the Department of English Language and Literature at the Faculty of Education, Charles University, Prague. He's interested in TOEFL methodology. He's interested in pragmatic linguistics, scientific linguistics, and the list is much longer. And Helena Sajgalikova, who is at the moment sitting in the audience, but I think we're probably going to have you here. No? Later. She is an associate professor at the Faculty of Applied Languages, University of Economics in Bratislava, that's Slovakia, for some of you, and the Faculty of Management, Comenius University in the same town. So, the floor is yours.
Nice. So, welcome everybody. I would like to present the results of our research, which obviously is international, as you can see, and not only European, but what's interesting is that it was really cross-cultural, and we cooperated with Matt from Japan, which was really interesting because Japanese culture is very different from the European one. So once again, this is the list. Unfortunately, Marta Guinness from the VA University in Spain, she retired during the research, so she's not present anymore. However, you should pay contribution also to this woman who also researched in Spain at her university. So, first of all, the research focused on the concept of willingness to communicate, which does not originate from the theory of second language acquisition, but from communication studies. It is based on the predisposition that there exists certain probability of initiating communication when an individual is free to do so. However, the theory of first language acquisition considers the willingness to communicate L1, and of course it focused mainly on the personality traits, so it studied to what extent personality affects the willingness to communicate in L1. So from communication studies through first language acquisition theories, in which they observe that people are different, and there are people who are more willing to communicate and initiate communication exchanges, whereas there are people who are not able or not willing to initiate communication. And what's interesting is that this concept of willingness to communicate was adopted by second language acquisition theories, namely by the psychology of SLA. There is one well-known author, Zoltán Verny, one of the most famous psycholinguists and psychologists in second language acquisition, who claims that willingness to communicate, in fact, is more significant when measuring somebody's performance in second language than the communicative competence itself. We adopted this model which considers more factors to affect the willingness to communicate in second language. Today, the whole model has 6 layers, and you can see that there are a lot of aspects that need to be considered. From personality traits up to the willingness to communicate, And you can see that the second layer becomes more decisive before communication behavior is realized. So even though a person has certain predispositions, positive predispositions to communicate in a second language, personality matters. However, if the person is not willing to communicate, then the personality traits are not as significant as the willingness itself in this model. However, there are 12 different factors that need to be considered. But communication behavior, even in an L2 class, is certainly affected by willingness to communicate. So we adopted this model and we studied to what extent there are differences, intercultural differences in between Spanish, Czech, Slovakian and Japanese students in terms of their willingness to communicate. However, there is some current research overview. So for instance, students are more willing to communicate and talk if they know that they learned something. So if they know that it is for the purpose of learning, they will probably be more willing to communicate in an L2 class. Then it definitely seems to be dependent on culture. So there are cultures that are more willing to communicate, cultures that are less willing to communicate. It depends on self-confidence, of course, as well, and levels of anxiety. So there is a specific foreign language anxiety, which is a diagnosis itself. So certain people have very low level of anxiety, and they become so anxious when they are supposed to speak in a foreign language that it makes them unable or unwilling to communicate. The more self-confident the person is, the more willing to communicate he or she will be. Then what makes people more willing to communicate is the level of communication competence. So it can be the communicative competence in an L2. More advanced students will or show or they prove to be more willing to communicate than beginners, for instance. And greater opportunities for natural contact rather than institutional environment makes people more willing to communicate as well. So these have been proved, in fact, to affect the willingness to communicate. And our study wanted to discover the cultural differences. We focused on what the differences are between students from different cultures, and we had two research questions. First, is there a tendency among the four countries? And is there what could be identified as the difference? And we used a questionnaire which was adopted from Professor Milomoto, who published his research in 2014, which is a 30-item questionnaire based on a 6-point chart where students either strongly agreed or disagreed with certain statements. For instance, I look forward to opportunities to speak English. This certainly reveals to what extent the person feels anxious about speaking in a foreign language. And we used factor analysis to discriminate what factors affect students' willingness or anxiety among their cultures. If there are no cultural differences, the factor analysis would have to be the same for all the countries. If the factors differ, then there are cultural differences and we can support our hypothesis. I will just briefly explain what it means to factorize or to perform factor analysis. So it's done in a matrix where the items, for instance, item 2 is correlated with other items. And if there is strong correlation between the items, which is usually 0.5 above, then the result, this is not done manually, this is what the computer does. Yeah? I only want to explain what it means to factorize in terms of factor analysis. And what happens is that certain items correlate with other items. And they create groups, because if item 7 correlates with item 6, and item 6 correlates with item 5, then item 5 will probably correlate with item 7. They create groups of correlations, and these groups are called factors. Okay? So there are groups, as you can see, that highly correlate. And then the matrix is rotated, and the factors, the real factors, become or the whole matrix becomes symmetric above the diagonal. So the groups will be symmetric. And then you can say that the questions in the groups that correlate together is a factor. Okay? Now I will show you what our students' population was in Japan. It was 129 students, 138 in the Slovak Republic. In the Czech Republic, 300. Unfortunately, in Spain, it was 93. Mostly those were students of bachelor and follow-up master study programs. In Japan, 2 private universities. In Slovak Czech Republic, it was public universities, the University of Economics, Communist University, and Charles University in the Czech Republic, and 1 private university, University of Ljubljana. And the students were not philologists. Those were students from various academic programs who studied English for some professional and academic purposes. And for instance, in Japan, those were students of law, international business, French. In the Czech Republic, those were mainly students of physics, mathematics. But you can see that the students' population varied over the various disciplines. It was not only a single disciplinary issue. And we studied the various items and to what extent those were represented. And we compared these descriptive statistics in between countries. We didn't include Spain because, as you could see, the number of students in Spain did not contribute much. So we excluded them because the population was not representative. What's interesting is that if you compare top 2 items and the bottom 2 items, then Slovak Republic and Czech Republic are the very same. There is one little difference in terms of item 1 in the Czech Republic. I worry that our students think my English speaking ability is low. And this appeared to be significant for Czech students. So Czech students were found a bit different from Slovakian, but mostly, if you compare their questionnaires, they are the same. But the Japanese were completely different in terms of descriptive statistics. We are not talking about the factors, but about the items in particular. So that was the first finding. And these are the factors that affect somebody's communication abilities. And you can see that the factors for Slovak Republic and Czech Republic are almost the same. So the factor of willingness to communicate affects our students' communication performance in an L2 class, self-confidence as well, motivational intensity is an important factor that was isolated in the matrix. However, the Czech Republic is different in factor 1, where, as I said, fear of negative evaluation is an important factor, unlike Slovak students and unlike Japanese students. Yeah. So, what the Japanese have in common with Slovak is speaking nervousness, which is a significant factor. So, what the results show is that there are cultural differences, but there are fewer differences in between Slovak and Czech culture, which was confirmed definitely. As we could see, the items analysis as well as factor analysis showed a lot of differences, a lot of similarities, more than any differences. All students throughout all the four cultures showed the importance of English. They proved that English is important for them. However, they are not confident enough to use it. Czech students are self-confident. However, when they have to communicate on academic topics, then they declare that their willingness is definitely lower. They are more anxious. And as I said, Czech students worry about what other people think, unlike all other students, which was factor one in the factor analysis that was significant. And we believe that this is not culture-based, but field or discipline-based, because you could see that students from the Czech Republic were from the Faculty of Mathematics and Physics, unlike all other faculties who were mostly students of humanities. And because there was also a qualitative part, they declared that they have bad experience in their own one. Because these disciplines, mathematicians, students of physics, mathematics, they often suffer from various learning disabilities. There are a lot of students of Asperger's syndrome, autism, a lot of stuttering students as well. So they, even in L1, they declare that they are afraid, that they are anxious to communicate. So we believe that Czech students are not so different in terms of these cultural factors, but this slight difference rises from the disciplinary differences. And definitely Czech as well as Slovak students prefer informal settings, which means outside the classroom, talking to, for instance, tourists, and when they do not know people who they communicate with. That's an interesting fact that Czech students, that the Faculty of Mathematics and Physics, for instance, they do not like activities in which they have to cooperate with other students. So their L1, as well as necessarily L2 communication abilities must be affected by their disciplinary as well as personality traits. So, we proved that there are definitely culture specifics because of the factor analysis. We proved that the factors are different, as well as the differences between the particular items, which means an item analysis. And there is a new hypothesis that there will be field, domain, subject, or specialization specifics, which was not our purpose to prove. However, it arises from the qualitative part of the research. And the slight differences between Czech and Slovak students. They will be more domain-specific rather than culture-specific, because our cultures are very close to each other. Yeah. And the research results were published in Tokyo Journal of Language Learning and Teaching, at Tokyo University at the Institute for Research in Foreign Languages in Japan last year. So if you are interested, you can find out more information, especially the statistics, which I can present here. So those were the references. I would like to thank you for your attention. And now it's time to deal with questions, either online or.
Okay, well, before we have the questions, let's have a round of applause. For the first part, and let's now officially open question and answer session to this presentation. I'm going to have a look whether we've got something in the chat. No. Okay. I was wondering, perhaps if you've said it, please accept my deep apologies. The data this was self-evaluation data. Like students were talking about themselves, they were evaluating. So have you thought about perhaps triangulating this source of information with other source of information? Because students might not always be able to evaluate themselves.
Yeah, I think that the statements, of course, they were very simple. And we use a standardized questionnaire, which have been pre-tested.
Right.
So we already considered data from the previous researches.
So it was a reliable tool.
Yeah, it was a reliable questionnaire. It was adopted from Ivamoto's research.
Right.
Yeah. And we enabled our students to comment. So they would express their worries. If they weren't able to assess something, they usually said that they are not able to consider. But the statements are very simplistic. It's a very clever questionnaire.
Okay.
It doesn't contain any situations that they wouldn't be able to consider.
Okay, yeah.
It's very user-friendly.
Okay. Do we have a question? Okay, Linda.
Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. I will definitely read your article if I get access to it. What I wanted to ask, whether you are thinking maybe of a follow-up study concerning just the Czech group, just to see the, let's say, the approach of, let's say, students of mathematics and the students of humanities, because I feel there is a great potential for greater understanding of what's actually going on. Because as you said, and I'm not surprised, maybe none of us is surprised, that there are some specifics that we intuitively have about students of various disciplines.
Sure, yeah.
So are you thinking of capturing it scientifically?
Yeah, it would be nice to prove the hypothesis because it's near the hypothesis. So it would, definitely. It's an inspiration for some follow-up research.
May I add something? So I do teach organizational cultures, and one of really the issue over there are professional occupational subcultures, which is in fact in real life that's a problem. So that if a lawyer talks to a lawyer, they understand each other, even if they have to overcome some language barriers. But civil engineer in Slovak doesn't understand lawyer in Slovak, so this is the point, and that's the same thing. I don't know who decides about the future career of the students, if they are parents or students. I always ask, but it's half by half, and mostly they are not very open, and they always say that it was their decision, I doubt, but anyway. Obviously there are some tendencies, either coming from the family or personality traits. It's just one part of that story, but after 5, 6, or how many years of studies, they identify with the culture, because otherwise they wouldn't be successful at that in those fields. Okay, so that if the field requires almost no communication, but in really engineering or somewhere, you just draw pictures and you do not talk much. So how to expect that you are talkative then, or eloquent, and you are not using similes because it must accurate as it is in math. Okay? Otherwise, if you study something else and you are expected to be creative, so you deal with that in the area. What hasn't been taken into account, and it can be done forever, is what the educational context requires from the students. Imagine we are not schizophrenic, so that if I study in the courses where I'm not expected to communicate much and have the only one correct answer always, and this is always in the situation when I am asked to answer, and suddenly I have language course, and I switch to absolutely different mode, and I start being communicative, and then I have another course, and I behave different. This doesn't work like that. So that this is not, for instance, it's discipline, but also the educational system. So that this is not taken into account. We're talking about presentation skills. I'm old enough so that I'm a bit experienced. I'm just shocked that somebody says that if we train people to use these skills and develop skills, they will be successful everywhere. Sorry, it doesn't work like that. And this is true about all these things. So they were very open, and they were actually absolutely frank when saying that, but this is always through the vision, through the perspective of their field, where they think this is the ideal. If I want to be successful, I should behave that way. And this is the representation of the field itself and the education. educational system.
Okay. Yes. So what is the next step for this data? Will you be able, or would you like to be able to apply the research results in a classroom setting, or what would it?
Yeah, we would have to discriminate the disciplines. We would have to collect a lot of new data that would be discipline specific, and we would have to need to have enough population large enough for each discipline, which we didn't have because we focused on the cultural differences. Yeah. But definitely, I have a few hypotheses. For instance, in mathematics, making a mistake is something inadequate. So definitely, Czech students in the qualitative part of the research declared that they are scared of making mistakes, and that's the reason why they are anxious. Because they also make mistakes in L1 because of the learning disabilities and stuttering and such things. So they are affected by both their L1 experience and the domain or the specifics of their domain that they don't want to show. And that's the reason why they are more willing to communicate to foreigners, which is weird to me. I would expect them that they reduce their anxiety when speaking to somebody they know, but it's the opposite way. Because if, that was shocking for me, anyway. It's easier for them to speak to some good foreigner.
Okay, we had a question over there, please.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to know what are the implications of this result, these results in the classroom. What does it mean for teachers? Should they not ask them to speak?
So for instance, in the class of English for mathematicians, I would not force students to work in pairs or in groups because it's not their nature. And it's much more easy for them if they present their own findings on their own. They don't have to cooperate. That's the first thing. Second, it's very difficult to find good textbooks, for instance, for the particular domains in terms of methodology. Because in English classes, the communicative method or approach is the prevailing one. However, it appears to be inconvenient for students who are not so communicative, because again, it's not their nature. And for instance, at the Faculty of Mathematics and Physics, where we did the research, they also use communicative textbooks, and they say that students do not like them. It's obvious why. Because they have little to say on the topics. When communicating with people that they know, and that they will show their mistakes, problems, stuttering, for instance. So it's necessary to show more respect to their needs in this way, for instance. But it's not possible to generalize it over all the faculties and departments, because obviously students of law have a bit different communicative willingness to communicate. Yeah. And it will be affected by different factors.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Can one change the beliefs of themselves slowly, or because there are various forms of communication. One can start with writing.
Yeah, for
It's a form of
instance.
communication.
Yeah.
And I guess they are communicating.
Yeah. In the qualitative part, they explained a lot. Yeah, so it is about pattern, interaction pattern definitely, which is different from students of humanities. Secondly is topics. So some teachers, language teachers say that they are not communicative, but it is because of the topics. They have little to say on the weather. If they say one sentence, it's success, but it's not because their language level is low. It's not because of this. It's just because they find it stupid. They even say, look out of the window. They're very straightforward. Yeah? So, but if they have to speak about a math problem, for instance, then they give perfect presentation, and they come into interaction with each other. So this is it.
Because I also have some experience teaching Asian students, and it's very interesting. We have this issue on one hand, we try and give them opportunities to communicate as they speak, and on the other hand, they are reluctant to engage in these activities. But then when we ask them at the end of the course for suggestions on how to improve, they always say they want more speaking opportunities. And I expect that these students too would say the same thing.
Yeah.
We haven't had the opportunity to speak enough.
Yeah.
So this is, how the students perceive themselves, their willingness to communicate, how they're integrated in their culture, they are, but also their perceived needs, how the needs that they perceive. So it's also, I think, very important for teachers to ask the students how much they want to learn how to speak in foreign language.
That's, I mean, in terms of writing, for instance, students of mathematics, physics, as well as computer science, usually their essays, like opinion essays are, I can say, horrible in a way, yeah. But what we did, we had the so-called proofs without words. Those are pictures that present some mathematical concept, a theorem, and a picture. And they had to write an essay on explaining what it proves. And those were wonderful essays. So if they have an opportunity in terms of writing and a good task, they say it must be a reasonable task. But what is reasonable for a mathematician is totally different from what is reasonable for a lawyer.
Because you gave them a very concrete and specific input.
Yeah.
Yes, they were able to, yes, so that they were able to produce something.
Yeah, it is, they need to know that the goal is reasonable, but they have to really explain something to somebody who probably doesn't have. Talking about a lawyer is not challenging. Yeah.
Okay.
But sometimes the communicative textbooks are very artificial. You know, the situations, topics.
That is why, I mean, there's this trend to move into authentic, using authentic material, blogs, for example. Blogs of mathematicians, they're there, available. What do they think about? What do they discuss? And we can really find, move into the world of authenticity and authentic sources is one aspect. Getting them to be part of a wider community, and not just students in mathematics and philosophy, but they belong to a broader community.
Well, I think that's a whole new area, like getting people or kids, students to speak through, perhaps more engaging input, more engaging content, but that would be a topic for another presentation. Okay. So, yes, so if we have no other questions from the audience, I would like to thank once again Martin and his colleague Helena, who was sitting and supporting him quietly in the audience, and thank you very much to all of you as well for engaging in the discussion and making it all happen. So thank you very much and enjoy your life. Lunch. But life as well.